Welcome to the talking series. Today's session is on sustainability. I'm going to probably just wait another minute so we can let some others join. And once it hits 12 o'clock, I'll be passing on to Anna. But before that, I just wanted to go over some housekeeping. So if you can please keep your microphones muted, that would be great. If you have any questions, we do have time at the end for some questions, but if you'd like to either raise your hand or pop those questions in the chat, that would be fantastic. And then also, if you could drop your LinkedIns in the chat so we can connect and continue the conversations offline. But it is 12 o'clock, so I'll pass on to Anna.
Hello, good morning, everyone. My name's Anna Hudson, and I work as Head of Financial Accounting at ACCA. This webinar came about as we were talking within one of the ACCA networks, specifically the Public Sector and Not-for-Profit Network, quite a long name, Public Sector and Not-for-Profit Network. We were talking about financial pressures on organisations at the moment, particularly within the UK, and not-for-profit sector, with both the recent minimum wage increases and the increase to employers' national insurance. Quite a few of the not-for-profit members particularly felt under a lot of pressure. And we talked a bit about how reducing your energy consumption is a huge win if you can identify opportunities, as it achieves cost savings straight to the bottom line. And if you manage it right, these savings can really have quite minimal impact on your operations. The sort of classic example is that if you turn your thermostat down by 1 degree, it saves you energy and most people won't notice. There are also investor save options like installing solar panels, which will pay back for themselves with the energy savings in around 10 years, or upgrading your LED lighting or your lighting to LEDs. And it's obviously important for us as finance professionals to really lean into these ideas, both the investor save opportunities and other employees, the sort of low cost, no cost measures. At the heart of a lot of the lower cost measures are all focused on employee engagement and getting your staff to sort of shut a window if it's cold outside to minimise heat loss in the winter, or sort of lowering that thermostat by a degree to keep your heating down. I mean, it all seems pretty mad in the heat of the summer. I should be saying up your thermostat to reduce your air conditioning, shouldn't I? Keep those windows shut to avoid losing your air conditioning. Things like turning off a light that's not in use, all of those things that you really rely on people in your organisation to do, and they will have an impact, or what will have a negative impact is not doing these things. And as well as those sort of basic no-cost measures, the sort of low-cost measures could be installing timers to turn off equipment to stand by at certain times, or light sensors. And really, as accountants, we should be pushing for these and not just devolving energy management to your estates function, and instead holding them to account, be interested in what they're doing, asking those questions to really understand other opportunities to cut down on your energy costs. And of course, no sustainability presentation is complete without reflecting on the imperative that global climate change puts on all organisations to put steps in place to minimise their environmental impact and mitigate against climate change. You'll have seen recent headline this week that extreme weather is the new normal in the UK, which will impact on all businesses, as extreme weather increases risks for a lot of organisation. If you've got people on the road, people travelling, storm, flooding, high winds, all increase that sort of that danger in the insurance perspective. But you also get damage to your properties, and then customer behaviour as well. There's a lot of organisations out there that really, their customer base do have certain trends, particularly in those extreme weather conditions where people just don't want to leave the house, they're not going to be buying. So all of these costs associated with extreme weather obviously has an impact on us as finance professionals in trying to support organisations. And indeed, they could disrupt your operations as well, which is, potentially lost revenue, lost margins. I think the final point on this slide is about employee satisfaction, and on reflection, I probably should have added customer satisfaction too. It's really good for organisations to demonstrate a real commitment to managing their environmental impact. It makes you a more attractive employer and more attractive to do business with. So there's so many reasons to be engaging with this agenda. Thanks to everyone for taking the time to come to the webinar. So what I'll do is give you a bit of background about the organisation that I work for and talk you through what we're doing to manage our environmental impact, and particularly focusing on the challenges. As we all know, that's the most important bit of any work, isn't it? What's going wrong? What are you doing to fix it? And it'll be really interesting to hear from the other two presenters as well. Thanks, Petra, for moving on the slide. So I've been involved with sustainability reporting for the last couple of years in my role as head of financial accounting. Going back a few years prior to that, I worked at an environmental consultancy for a number of years. And I've always found myself, at the very least, on a green network somewhere, as I do think it's important that we all do our bit. I'm a keen advocate. So the organisation I work for, ACCA, which is the Advisory, Conciliation and Arbitration Service, is an arm's length body of the Department of Business and Trade. So it sits within the civil service. It's an office-based organisation. We have around 1,100 employees across 11 different offices in Great Britain. Most of our staff are working on a helpline, working in conciliation, which is done either virtually or through in-person meetings, conducting training, which again are either in-person or virtual, and then working on policy as well. So most of our emissions are estates-based and travel within the UK as well. We've just come out of a 5-year targeted reduction period. It used pre-COVID benchmarks for the reduction targets, which were set at the start of that 5 years ago. And in that time, obviously, COVID happened, and it really did change the way that we work significantly. There's a lot more home working, which has resulted in a reduced estate. Where we've made office moves, we've made them in a smart way and made sure that we're getting the right size estate for the people that the proportion of people that work from the office. And we did travel less. We're traveling a bit more now, but there was a period where we really travelled a lot less. So our targets were quite challenging when they were put together pre-COVID, but then actually 5 years down the line, following these massive shifts in the way that we work, they were really quite achievable when we got there. So at the moment, we're really looking to reset our targets and put something really ambitious in place to target ourselves and hold ourselves to account. As a central government body, we'll be aligning our targets with the government's greening government commitments when they're published. So really, where I work, think offices, think travel, but UK-based travel, which I guess is important from obviously air emissions can be quite high if you're traveling overseas. So in terms of challenges, we're in multi-tenanted buildings, which are landlord managed. The landlord provides data, and unfortunately, mostly it's shared data divided up according to occupancy. And even in some cases, it's industry standard calculations are used. So a sort of primary push of ours is to get better data. With better data, we can measure our performance, measure our reductions much better. So that's a real key priority for us. And we're also, as the buildings are landlord managed, we're very reliant on the landlord to operate the buildings efficiently and maintain the equipment well. which is quite tricky to do in some of the older buildings we're in. We're in some newer buildings as well, which do have really, really good equipment. And to sort of manage that challenge, we're putting pressure on the landlord to improve data accuracy, and manage the office as well. Our estates teams have regular meetings with the landlords to set our expectations. And it's really ongoing work that will be ongoing forever, essentially, as long as we're in this setup. We're going to constantly need to engage with the landlord, and the better data we get, we'll be able to see what they're doing, see the work. And we do, where we are moving offices, where our tenancy periods are up, we need to have think smartly in our office moves. What are the options, what are the efficient buildings? So yeah, that's all really important stuff. I think the next challenge, since we've moved to a more remote setup, so we're across 11 offices anyway, and we're not in the office as frequently as we were pre-COVID, where it was 5 days a week. Our green network and our sort of staff seem less engaged in the green agenda. I think that's really, when you're in an office 5 days a week, that broken radiator or dripping tap really irritates you. When you're in less frequently, you're less likely to engage, you're less likely to report these things, you're less likely to spot opportunities. So we're really challenged with how to motivate these individuals and come up to help us come up with ideas, as it's a iterative thing. We do have a sustainability committee that meets monthly. It's currently developing plans for the year to look at where we can have an impact. Areas we're looking at are sort of alongside the straightforward emissions reductions. We're looking at reducing waste to landfill, reducing ICT emissions, looking at reducing printing, single-use plastic purchases, and increasing staff engagement, and trying to organise a few volunteer days. So we're able to take up to 3 volunteering days a year. So we're looking at trying to put some opportunities on around environmental volunteering. We're also trying to get around to all directorates to engage with a wide pool of staff. And I think that leads me on to my next challenge, really, that all of this needs people on the ground to do their work. And, in any organisation, there's always more work than you can really do, and you've got to prioritise. So I think securing the resource to work on sustainability and being smart about prioritising what you do is a challenge that we face, and we try and work through it, but I'm sure that will ring a few bells for the people on the call. We are also looking at procurement and the supply management process. When we do our procurement, we require quite high environmental standards. So I'm confident our suppliers do have good standards. But what I'd like to sort of take a bit of a deep dive into is looking at the process of supplier management once they're onboarded. How often are we asking them about their environmental data and their environmental commitments, just to really keep on top of that. Then the final slide I had was to talk a bit about opportunities. So we're quite lucky to have a board who are fairly pro environmental initiatives, and we can expect to get support when we put things up to them. And I think looking at your board is really key for all of this. We're currently implementing the Task Force for Climate Related Financial Disclosures Framework, or TCFD, for those of you who know it. We're implementing it in a phased approach at the moment, which is what central government departments are doing. And I think it's a really helpful tool to put identify your risks and identify your opportunities, identify mitigations. It's a really helpful tool to kind of pop them down and share them with your board to really show this is potentially what could happen. There's less looking at what we can do to reduce our footprint, and more, well, this is what it means for our business, like that operational disruption that I talked about earlier. Okay, if we might have operational disruption, how do we mitigate against that? And I think that the TCFD framework really aims to put that at the heart of governance, and really, I guess, up the understanding of the board to really buy into just ensuring their companies are robust and well prepared for climate change. So even if you fall out of scope of the guidance, I'd really recommend having a look at it. We're using the TCFD guidance, which is published by the HM Treasury for adoption within the public sector. But yeah, if you're not doing TCFD reporting, I would recommend having a little read and thinking about how you could apply it at your organisation. So that is a bit of a run through of what we're doing on sustainability, and hopefully a bit of food for thought for all of you on the call. So I'll pass back to Petra.
Thank you, Anna. So we are going to move on to Peter Lewis now.
Hi, thanks very much. When going either beyond first place on a presentation, it's always a bit nerve-wracking because you're worried that the previous presenter may have covered, and it's great. There was very little overlap because I've looked at this very much from a third-party perspective. So thanks, Anna. That was great. There are some common themes, but if we go on to the next slide, please. Yeah, I started by saying to AI, what's the role of a housing association in sustainability? And that's what it came up with. Now, I think it's quite a good definition that we play a key role, but really what it's saying is, as a social housing provider, it's sort of everything we do and supporting our tenants to do things differently. So this is very much a partnership. So I then started to look at how do we do it. And the first bit is what's termed retrofitting our homes, which is about insulation, heat pumps, solar panels. And this is a great thing to do. However, the thing that's perhaps not driving it forward as far yet as we'd like it is funding, because we as social housing providers don't have enough funding to do all the work that is needed. Government would like to help. We're based in Wales, and the Welsh Government are looking at solutions, and they would like to help, but obviously they don't have a bottomless purse either to be able to fund it. So we're working our way through and doing key bits at the moment, focused intervention, whilst we all work together on a funding model. And we've all lived through the cost of living crises, and we realise how important it is to reduce energy costs, particularly for those in social housing. So this work has an imperative. And to pick on what Anna had said earlier about extreme weather being the new norm, hot or cold, this really matters. Another thing we can do that's a bit different is promoting biodiversity in terms of the green spaces, because in our estates we'll have green space, and we have, as an organisation, spent quite a bit of time, and we've got a local expert who helps plant trees, looks at grass, looks at wildflower meadows, etc. So we are trying to find different ways to do things, and that's another step which is perhaps a little different from what other organisations can do. We can all obviously operate in a sustainable way by reducing energy, and I think that is the one bit of overlap, switching to LED light bulbs and using smart monitoring and so on. Those are things that we're all used to. Using renewable energy, that has a slight cost, but using green rather than, I think the term they use is brown energy. And green does sound so much nicer somehow. So yeah, trying to use green energy where you can. And ironically, where we're based, it's coastal. We can actually see all the windmills out at sea from our office that is providing so much of this renewable energy. Waste minimisation, that's really important. Making sure that we offer our tenants the opportunity to recycle, that the areas are laid out neatly that encourage recycling. And then sustainable supply chain, try to source things locally, reducing mileage, ethically, and generally working with our suppliers. The next bit is promote sustainable living practices. So this is about working with people, particularly in sustainable homes, which I'll come on to in a minute, about how they live in terms of use of heat, how you dry clothes, all those different things, they matter. And it's how you provide that guidance without preaching and without turning people off. And that's a key factor for housing. And I'm going to go on to building to a sustainable standard, which is about a sustainable, well-insulated product. And if we go to the next slide, I'm going to give you a case study, because we actually build the timber frames for our own highly insulated homes. So we have a factory at Rill, and that actually develops not only the timber frame for the building, but it also puts the floor joists, the outdoor storage, which is basically sheds, cycle stores, things like that, and fence panels. We use sustainable timber sources and try to be energy efficient. And we've used this as a local employment and apprenticeship and training opportunity. So we've actually got people who had limited skill before, who were perhaps further away from the job market, and we've used this to help them build our properties. So, and that's been a significant investment, and you'll see at the bottom just a few examples of the big machine that helps build the joists, some of the joists we've produced, the team that do it, and the little unit which was a redundant building supplies merchant that we bought their old premises and turned it into something to make a real difference in the communities we serve. So the next page. Yeah, basically we feel that we're highly sustainable because we use renewable material, which is timber, which helps store carbon in its life. It helps with, as I said, the carbon capture. You've then got sustainable sourcing, so we only use timber from sustainable sources. By doing off-site construction, it helps speed up the production and can be done in a more of a factory environment to help reduce waste. It can be more precision, and it helps us reduce landfill. And you'll see there that basically that factory's percentage is 0.4% goes to landfill. Basically, a lot of it can be recovered or recycled, which is really important. So the next slide shows the benefits to those who live in the homes. Reduced energy bills. It's a healthier environment, so less mold, less allergens, more air quality, better sound insulation, and the design helps them be more natural light, makes them thermally sustainable, and it's very much flexible design. But as I've said earlier, people need to learn to live in these houses because they are different, because you don't actually have the same traditional heat source, and you have to manage your heat better. But it is a really, really interesting and groundbreaking development. People who've lived in the houses we've developed so far have liked what they're living in. So that's a little bit about how we go sustainable. The next slide talks about sustainability reporting standard for housing, because we are, as housing associations, we've come together to follow a framework which has 12 key elements to it, looking at environmental, social and governance, and you have to report against 44 criteria. It's a voluntary framework, and as it stands, 170 adopters, of which 132 are housing associations and 38 are funders, because this sector has a lot of funding to enable it to build its properties. I sort of at times describe it as having a giant mortgage, because we have a lot of houses which have a lot of debt supporting them, but we have to make sure that the lenders are happy with what we're doing because they've got their social commitments. And to evidence it, having this sustainability reporting standard is really helpful. As I say, it improves transparency, accountability, and comparability. And as I say, the scope is there, that it measures things like carbon emissions, energy, social engagement, diversity, and a lot of wider issues. So really good framework, but it started from a focus on sustainability. And for us, what it made us think about was everything that was there, we either did measure or knew we should measure. So it was very quick that we said, yeah, this is a framework we should follow, because the things we didn't measure, we wanted to measure, and now we do. And we're tracking it, trending it, and seeing how well we're performing against the sustainability agenda. So my last slide is just a few conclusions. You've got to understand your position, which we did, but we then needed to know where we were going, so we have a clear plan. It was engagement with colleagues and tenants is vital, because if people aren't engaged, these things don't go forward at the pace and are not as sustainable and retained long term. You've got to communicate, but remember, progress may be incremental. You can't get there all in one day. For us, it was about not being scared to innovate. We went and built the more sustainable house. It was totally different to what we'd done. We had to spend time with lenders and insurers and convince them that it was an appropriate product. And then we had to work with people living in the properties to help them to understand the nature of the new homes. And the last one I said is take time to ensure the solution is correct. It's not about rushing it because there is an agenda. It's about thinking wider and making sure that you're doing the right things. So that's all I'd like to say. So hopefully that was helpful, and hopefully I haven't stolen any of your presentation coming up.
Thank you, Peter. Thanks. So next we have Mark Johnson from ACCA.
Thanks, Petra. And yeah, thank you very much, Anna and Peter, for really practical and interesting presentations. Hopefully what I'm going to say is builds on those and sort of takes a slight step back, because what we've heard so far is really interesting and about how you apply some of this stuff. But I just wanted to talk a little bit about why ACCA thinks sustainability reporting for the public sector is something that's worth advocating for, worth public sector bodies engaging with. So we've been working on this issue for quite a few years, really, particularly engaging with something called the International Public Sector Accounting Standards Board. So Anna and Peter have already talked about the various different frameworks there are. There are a huge number, and what IPSASB, the International Public Sector Accounting Standards Board, is trying to do is set out sustainability reporting standards for the public sector, where perhaps in some parts of the public sector, in some countries, some governments aren't as far forward as we are in different parts of the public sector in the UK. So it's really kind of looking at a global standard that is public sector specific. So to kind of get people thinking about this, we produced a report a couple of years ago now about preparing for sustainability reporting and assurance, of course, because audit's an important part of this. So although we don't often articulate it in this way, I think sustainable development is actually one of the core purposes of government, of the public sector. And why should we be interested in accountants? Well, it's about managing resources, I think, really. It's how do we manage resources so that we can address the needs and challenges that we're facing today, but also ensuring that future generations are able to meet their own needs. And that underpins that definition of sustainability that you can see there. That's pretty, it's almost 40 years old now, but it's still as relevant as ever, I think. So I think the only way we can fully understand whether we can achieve sustainable development is by measuring and reporting on how we're addressing those challenges. And I think despite it probably being at the heart of what the public sector does, if we think about it, I think it's fair to say that much of the sort of sustainability reporting agenda has been driven by the private sector, and certainly that's where the TCFD that Anna spoke about sort of originated from. So I think it is crucial really that the public sector isn't left behind, and that's why we've been advocating for this. That's why we produced this report, and why we've been engaging with the international boards as they develop those sustainability reporting standards. So I think also it's worth taking a step back and thinking about sustainable development and sustainability in the round. Of course, climate change is urgent. We've already talked about that. But sustainability doesn't just think about environmental considerations, it's also about the kind of social and economic impacts of human activities. So measuring and reporting on those kind of positive and negative contributions to sustainable development is something that the public sector needs to do. So I'll talk about that as we move on to the next slide, and we'll look at some of the reasons why we think the public sector needs to be engaged in sustainability reporting. So the first one there is really what I've just been talking about. Sustainability reporting should help to drive that progress towards sustainable development. And we as public sector kind of bodies have both the ability, but also the mandate to make a positive impact on people and planet. And then the second reason is to look at this kind of economy-wide perspective. As I mentioned, you've got considerable progress in sustainability reporting in the private sector, particularly in the largest organisations. But we know that public spending is also a really big proportion of GDP in many countries. So the ability to kind of combine that reporting from the private and public sectors will enable us as a whole to understand right across the economy how we're progressing towards sustainable development. And then thirdly, and Peter's talked about this already, about the need for investment, and different public sector bodies get their funding, of course, in different ways. But if we think about sort of central government as a whole, they need people to buy bonds, or if we're talking about the housing associations, then similarly some issue bonds, and there are various different ways of financing. But what those kind of investors want to see is information about climate, in particular, nature related risks and opportunities. So if the public sector can provide that information, it puts them in a better position to attract investment, or even donor funding where that's applicable. Yeah, so fourthly, I think good quality sustainability reporting by the public sector enables stakeholders to identify where progress is on track, and where there needs to be improvements. And I think Peter and Anna both talked about that. And that's really important actually for enhancing transparency and accountability, which obviously as finance professionals is something that matters to us. And then fifthly, as well as those kind of, I guess what I've talked about so far as sort of externally focused rationales, sustainability related information also ought to support internal decision making. So having the information at your fingertips helps decision makers in public sector bodies as they consider things like policy, budget and investment decisions. And then finally, I touched on this already, sustainability reporting has a really important role in building public trust. So whether it's at an organisational level with kind of net zero commitments, or at a whole of government and national level, through the UN or international agreements, organisations have made a sort of huge number of commitments across a broad range of different sort of sustainable development issues. So reporting on those is a way of kind of promoting trust, helping to build momentum and maintain momentum towards those international, national or organisational targets. Okay, so if we think about the principles for sustainability reporting, and I think this was really brought out in the previous presentations as well. It's about what matters most to the organisation. So Anna talked about, I guess, ACCA being a kind of people-based organisation. So it's the people that work there, the buildings they use, that's the focus for emissions. Whereas I guess there's a little bit more scope in an organisation like a housing association to think of things like Peter talked about biodiversity, about how the policies that the organisation sets can help customers, can help clients, whatever we want to call them in the public sector, to also work towards those environmental and sustainability goals. So I think it's really important that the organisation has, at the beginning of the kind of sustainability reporting journey, a realistic focus on what matters most. So you're not going to be able to report on every element of your impact on sustainable development. So each organisation needs to kind of review its sort of remit, its responsibilities, its operations in a kind of methodical way, and identify those areas of activity which have the most impact on sustainable development. And then secondly, organisations need to align how they report, what they report, with those overarching strategies that I touched on before, whether it's the sort of international, national, or organisational commitments they've made. And of course, it's the kind of combined efforts of all of those individual public sector bodies that contribute towards those overarching objectives. And then thirdly, it's important that governments and the public sector lead by example. So increasingly, we're seeing that public sector organisations have the ability as a kind of regulator to mandate sustainability reporting requirements on other organisations, on the private sector. So I think the public sector as well needs to demonstrate best practice by achieving those sort of same levels of transparency through its sustainability reporting that it expects, that it requires from other bodies. And then finally, wherever possible, we need to kind of align public sector sustainability reporting to existing frameworks. So you've just seen examples of some of those. So that really should enable an organisation to kind of adopt and embed the process more quickly and easily than if they're starting from scratch. And the use of recognised standards is also going to help in that kind of audit and assurance where that's appropriate of all of this information. Okay, we'll move on to the next slide. Thanks, Petra. So I just wanted to sort of, as I come towards the end of my presentation, talk a little bit about the international standards that I mentioned earlier. So now I know we've got a range of different organisations on this call, and it's probably more helpful for Anna and Peter to kind of talk about their experiences with their particular frameworks that they've been using. But what I wanted to do in this slide was just give you a sense of the direction of travel at a global level, because that may well start to impact on different parts of the UK public sector, maybe at different paces and in different ways, but I think it's worth being aware of what's going on at the global level. So as I said, IPSAS-B have been developing sustainability reporting standards for the public sector over the last couple of years. They've held sort of a number of different consultations on that. And what they're looking at now really is a kind of two-phase approach. So the first phase will be own operations, they're calling it. So that's I guess, the easiest to measure, isn't it? It's about what emissions does each public sector organisation, what emissions do they emit, for want of a better word, but also what's their impact perhaps on biodiversity, and what are the kind of their targets and how are they measuring up against those. And for some particularly small public sector organisations, that's probably going to be as far as the reporting goes, it's just that focus on their own activities. But actually, as I've touched on already, often public sector organisations have a wider role in kind of influencing or setting requirements, setting standards in a whole range of areas. So not just sort of saying about you must do this sustainability reporting, but it's about, you know, for for the housing association example that we talked about, it's about how are their policies towards residents actually going to help them achieve climate related and sustainability targets. So that, I guess, is things like what provision are we making for recycling? What are we doing in terms of decarbonising our heating and things like that? So for a lot of public sector organisations, there's that wider scope to make an impact across across society in some cases, but certainly across the sector that they're particularly working with and responsible for. So that's that phase 2, really, the public policy programs, and that will be reporting on how their public policy programs are having an effect. Particularly in the first instance, all of these requirements will relate to climate related kind of disclosures, but I think as time goes on, as these become more embedded, we'll probably look at that wider definition of sustainability that I started with. So hopefully that's been a kind of quick overview. You can look on our website. I should say my role at ACCA is to kind of lead on our public sector insights, so our research work globally on the public sector. So we've done this preparing for sustainability reporting and assurance report that you can find on our website. If you're kind of new to this topic and you want to see a kind of high level overview. But I'll pause there, Petra, and hopefully there's time for questions if people have it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mark. I do have 2 questions, but I will open the floor to any other questions before I ask my 2. No? Okay, that's fine. So my first question is for Anna. And of the challenges you discussed, what's the principal challenge for you?
So it's a good question. I think it's probably securing the dedicated resource to really spend time. I think once you've got the time to do things, there's lots of opportunity, there's lots of possibility, but I think we do struggle. There's been some staff movements which, you know, when you're trying to get someone new and then takes a while, and training them up takes a while. So I think it's probably the securing the staff resources. I mean, our opportunities, as Mark has said, being an office-based organisation, there's a lot less within our control, within our ability to do. And so as long as we've got people there, I think, yeah, I'd say resource is probably number 1, closely followed by data.
And then this is for all of you. My question was around what you think is the most effective area within sustainability to focus on. So like maybe reducing waste or the LED light bulbs. What would be the most effective area for people within this call to focus on to, I guess, get to that bottom line?
I mean, I suppose I quickly start by sort of going back to the point I made about thinking about where as you say, where your organisation can have the most impact. So really focusing on perhaps what's going to make the biggest impact in terms of emissions reductions, and a lot of sustainability reporting is focused on climate. So I think greenhouse gas emissions is probably the obvious place to start, given the kind of national targets that the whole of the UK has. But as I say, yeah, it's reviewing your own operations and your remit and working out. I don't think there's a single one-size-fits-all approach. So it'll be working out what's best and what's most relevant to your organisation.
Yeah, from my perspective, there are 2 bits. One is investment, but as I explained earlier, it's finding the funding for that investment, because a lot of times it's okay to borrow money to build properties because it adds to your revenue. A lot of the climate change investment wouldn't actually increase your revenue in terms of cladding and so, because you don't get the benefits of doing that insulation work and putting in heat pumps and things like that.
Mhm.
That largely passes to the tenants. So you have to find a way to make investment more sustainable and partner with other people such as energy companies, governments, etc. And that's the biggest area that we're trying to focus on, because you need to make sure that anything that you do to a building is a positive, doesn't increase dangers or cause problems for people, but at the same time you've got to try and find a way that it adds value one way or another, and working in partnership to fund it is going to be the key part of that.
Thank you. And I guess that kind of leads me to my last question. This is definitely like opinion based, but what sustainable practice do you think is the most underrated or overlooked within the public sector?
For me, it's working with your customer base, whoever that be, to help them understand how they can help you and change. Depends on the public sector or not for profit element that you work for, but where you've got large customer involvement, it's how can you help them to understand sustainability is probably the biggest untapped area for me.
Thanks, Peter.
I might be sort of cheeky and answer with another question, which I suppose is my reflection would be that we probably need to get better across the public sector at kind of collaboration on some of this. So either Anna or Peter, I just wondered if you had any examples of kind of where you have been working with public sector partners to achieve some of these targets and reduce emissions or increase biodiversity, things like that. Just be good to hear of any success or ways you're thinking about some of that.
Yeah, I suppose for us, the Government Property Agency are our landlord for the majority of our buildings. In fact, I think they have involvement in all of our buildings. And so I suppose we're heavily reliant on them and their green agenda. So so I think that's I guess who we partner with the most. Our sponsor department is the Department of Business and Trade, and they've set up a arm's length body network within their sort of group where we can exchange ideas, try and collaborate. I think it all comes back to enough resource at an individual time to push these things forward. I think that's the biggest struggle. There's loads of really good ideas, but it's just getting things done that can be tough when there's lots of other elements to focus on that will deliver government policy and the ultimate value for the taxpayer. But yes, it's difficult.
Thanks, Anna. And I think, Peter, do you have an answer?
Yeah, we have actually gone into partnership with another housing association to work on our retrofits together, because we realised that we needed to help and train people across the sector, because a lot of the skills to deal with some of the new equipment isn't there. So to increase our scale, we actually set up a joint venture which helps do the retrofit, but it has a larger scale, so we can put more money into training and supporting as we do that work. So that's our example.
Thank you, but thank you all so much. If there are any other questions, you can pop them in the chat or raise your hand. But that is the end of the talking series session. If you would love to stay in touch with myself, these are my details on the screen. So that's my email. You can also link with me on LinkedIn. And then if you'd also love to be part of the LinkedIn group for the public and not-for-profit sector, that is the link right there. Also, for the speakers today, I want to give a massive thank you to Anna, Peter, and Mark. You've honestly given such an insight into sustainability within the public sector. So thank you for that. But here are the details if you'd like to reach out to and continue the conversation that we've had here today. And thank you for joining, and I hope you enjoyed the session. Thank you.
Great.
Thank
Thank you very
you.
much. Thank you.
Thank